Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and I'm very happy to be joined today by two of my favorite people, Kayte Terry and Rachel Kahn, who I've both had on the show by themselves. But this is my first time having them on the show together, and I'm very happy. Kayte, Rachel, how are you guys?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Well, my birthday is June 9th, and it's Pride Month, so I'm extra gay.
Nice.
Well,
Yeah.
Happy birthday and happy Pride. And
Thank
on
you.
that note, since we're talking birthdays, yesterday was the birthday of Anne-Sophie Mathis, great French boxer, woman, but great French boxer. I had the pleasure.
A woman, but
I laughed at that one
people aren't
too.
expecting the woman part, and I need to mention that part so that people understand. And I had the great pleasure.
Sometimes,
Go ahead.
sometimes, girl punch.
Mhm.
Yes. And she didn't just punch, she punched like Tyson. So I had the pleasure of talking to her before her first fight with Holly Holm, in which she knocked the living shit out of Holly Holm. And I say talked with her loosely because she doesn't speak English, so I had to submit my interview questions in writing. But they translated for them and she answered them, and I was writing the column based on her answers to the questions. So it was like talking to her. But she only speaks French. But anyway, her birthday was yesterday. I spoke to her before her fight. The picture for her birthday, of course, was of the fight. I turned 48, the same age as her in April. So the last person I spoke to and wrote about in legacy media turned 48 the same year I did and posted the picture of the fight that we talked about. And so I'm just in a great mood today.
Cute. I went to a birthday party last night where there was a burlesque dancer dressed up as the Fanatic. So I'm in a pretty good mood too.
And if it was their birthday last night, then you can tell them they share the same birthday as a kick-ass woman who beat the crap out of Holly Holm, who's a huge star.
It was their birthday on Friday, but close enough.
Fair enough.
Close enough.
Fair enough. So we were going to talk about one movie in particular, The Substance, and about politics in media in general, which just leads me to one sort of reference that I'll drop before I let you guys talk to me about The Substance a bit. Someone was making a joke about Wonder Woman finally having a kid in DC Comics after Superman and Batman had a kid. And someone else mentioned, well, Wonder Woman had a kid before. This is just new. And yes, Wonder Woman did have a kid. And it's really another great abolition of the family moment, because Wonder Woman and Superman get pregnant after starting a sort of situationship and ending up together. But it's not really deliberate. And Superman is not really confident about the idea of an Ubermensch being raised by the two most powerful people on the planet. So they decide that their baby should be raised by ordinary humans like Superman was. So they give the baby to Batman.
That doesn't seem ordinary.
Yeah,
Not
I don't know if Clark Kent is like, isn't he from like Iowa? Like one of the corn states?
Kansas, Smallville,
Yeah, okay.
Kansas, which is
But
hilarious.
like,
Which is hilarious because the real metropolis is in Illinois, across the border from Kentucky, and is also a farm town. I think there was a joke there. The real metropolis is a lot like Smallville.
I just found out there's a real metropolis. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, Smallville captures it, right? Like, the reason, if Clark Kent is a decent person because he was raised by corn-fed farmers, the worst possible thing you could do is give him to Batman, right? Like, suddenly you're a billionaire and your dad's like, if Elon Musk was competent, that's not good. That's not going to make you a good person. Like,
I agree.
Well, no, but that's the whole thing, is that Batman's whole thing, and I want to get away from the Nazi Frank Miller stuff because Frank Miller was just bad for Batman. But the original Batman back in the day, and this has been lost so far since then. The original Batman is a guy who doesn't want any other kid to ever have his parents shot with a gun. And it's a really basic thing that ends up getting lost, in that Bruce Wayne is sort of a cover for Batman more than the other way around. And that Bruce Wayne's wealth ends up becoming instrumental to Batman's cause in a way that would be really cool if Batman actually threatened the status quo. Sadly, he doesn't, but that's a whole nother thing. Superman's the only DC comic book character who ever threatened the status quo. And that was always more accidental than anything else. They fired the original creator for having Superman put rich people in jail and tear down slums.
I mean, kind of parallel to that, right? Like, the reason Batman has gotten increasingly fascist is because they have increasingly made him into a cop.
Yes, they have.
Yeah, he's like the super cop.
And it's the sad irony is that when they made the Arrow TV show, they started out where the Green Arrow ended as this angry anarchist going after rich people. And they ended up with Green Arrow becoming a cop and basically being a toned down, friendlier Batman. And that was the great political flaw of that show. But we're not here to talk about my stuff. We're here to talk about the substance. So I'm going to shut up.
We can talk about your stuff too. I don't know anything about comics, but like, you know, it all ties in.
My Batman comics knowledge stops right around 2010, which, you know, was only a couple years ago.
Or nothing after that?
Yeah, it was like 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, it's like 2-3 years ago. No, before then, like up until about 2010, I'm like aware of that. Yeah. Then after that, you know, I like went to college and had a kid and like stopped keeping up with it.
Batman is one of several DC creative properties who has gone downhill over the years for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being that, like you guys said, he basically became a cop.
Well, hear me out on this. If Batman answers the question of what do police do with infinite budgets, but I also propose that the downfall of Batman is also what happens when you give police infinite budgets.
Yeah.
Well, the big problem with Batman is when they finally created the character Batman should have been, a genius hacker vigilante named Anarchy. Batman treated him like another bad guy, so that was disappointing.
You know, it's just liberal recuperation or whatever.
Well, and that's the real thing. The real problem with Batman is not that he's a fascist, though he's become more fascist over time. The biggest problem with Batman is he's a liberal cop booster who thinks he's making things better.
I mean, I think it could be both.
I mean, what's that saying? You scratch a liberal and they get even more liberal.
Yeah. Exactly.
Scratch a liberal and they turn communist. I think that's the saying.
Yeah, and Batman would never do what Captain America did, which is first, Batman would never have actually had the guts to take off his mask and put on the police uniform in the first place, the way Captain America did in a very interesting and educational run in the 70s. But more importantly, Captain America, when the race riot happened, took off his police uniform and put on the Captain America costume and changed sides to side with the rioters, and then quit being a cop because the police couldn't be reformed.
I love him. Can we have that version of comics back?
Yeah.
That version of comics is actually what we got in the first Captain America movie when they give a polio survivor superpowers and set him against Nazis. That was so true to the original comic that I wanted to cry The only thing, and they even had him getting in fights with people while he was before he was super, like in the comics, and lying to try to go fight the Nazis, like in the comics. Because the whole golden age Captain America is the story of a disabled Popular Front communist from Brooklyn who just wants to go kill Nazis. And the government won't let him go kill Nazis because he's 4F. And this super scientist invents a medicine to treat his chronic illness so he can go kill Nazis.
I would like to volunteer to go next for that medical treatment.
Right?
In my head, I've decided that Captain America also has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and that they gave him, some kind of magical genetic treatment that fixed him. And I want that for me.
I mean, that's the whole thing, is Captain America is a disabled person given superpowers who remembers what it's like to be disabled.
And, in a way, that's like the perfect inversion of the medical treatments in The Substance. I'm so good at this. So,
what a segue.
I'm so good at things. No, but I mean, I do think that, there is a parallel here that can get us on track, and I'm going to take it. Cool. Whereas Captain America is about using medical technology to make you stronger and more able to self-advocate, The Substance is entirely about using medical technologies. Well, and also it's about motherhood, but we'll circle back to that. The medical technologies in The Substance are existing for the purpose of literally erasing yourself so that you can be more palatable to a mass market.
That sounds very similar to one of my favorite creepy sci-fi movies that no one knows about, the absolutely wonderful Seconds by John Frankenheimer.
It is actually, it's Seconds for the girls.
That's good to know. That tells me everything I need to know about the movie right there, having seen Seconds.
Yeah, that's an excellent movie that everyone should go see. Or not go see. Watch it at home.
Watch however they can.
Probably not going to be in the theater.
I could go to somebody's house.
Classic Movies is where I saw it. I hate to do a commercial for Time Warner, but there we are. Turner Classic Movies is where I saw it.
I mean, to be fair, Time Warner at this point owns basically everything but Disney. So
here's the bad part. And this is the thing that disgusts me, because the one time that corruption could have prevented something horrible from happening, Donald Trump took AT&T's money, but still didn't let them buy Time Warner. And instead, the ridiculously right-wing Christian nationalist Discovery Channel bought Time Warner. And that explains everything that happened to the CW and HBO since that merger.
Well, obviously, Christian fundamentalist nationalists, have no taste. So we can start there. But no,
if you'd just taken the bribe and let AT&T buy Time Warner, so many things might have been different. Not that I love AT&T and that they aren't an evil corporation too, but I mean, Christian nationalists own Time Warner now.
To be fair, in the United States, Christian nationalists own mostly everything.
Yeah, they do own everything.
There's a difference, and I hate to say this because now I feel like I'm one of those stupid Democrats defending Biden, and this is not my meaning at all. But there really is, let's put it another way, absent the normalization of fascism that has been achieved now, there really is a difference between the well-meaning liberal and the out-and-out fascist. The problem is once you normalize fascism to a certain point, that completely disappears because now the well-meaning liberal just wants to support the police and stop the anarchist revolution. I
think it's actually even more based than that. I think the well-meaning liberal just wants to protect themselves, right? Yeah, if liberalism is fundamentally a narcissistic belief system, and I don't mean that in the narcissistic personality disorder, but I mean in the sense that it focuses on the self.
You focus individually on yourself,
right?
And your family.
In the Greek poem about Narcissus, and not like the disorder at all. Let's say.
Right, exactly. In the most classical sense of the word narcissism. Like it is about self. And I think the reason that there is like the scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds sort of scenario is because under threat, the liberal prerogative is to focus on yourself and protect yourself.
Not even real threat, under perceived threat.
Sure. I mean, the threat could be anything from, material to strictly ideological, right?
Yeah.
But the premise is protect yourself. And when your focus is protecting yourself as opposed to banding together and protecting each other, it makes it incredibly easy to become paralyzed, right? To do nothing in the face of fascism, which is, I think, what usually happens.
And then we get stories, extremely interesting stories like Seconds and The Substance, about people destroying themselves, trying to get a new sense of their individuality and disappearing into the sunken place to go with simple.
My take on The Substance is that goes so far that it starts to go in the other direction, which I think is really interesting. I think Seconds is not like that. And this isn't to say that it doesn't go far enough. It just has a different message. But I think The Substance is like the modification of the body goes so far as to become like unrecognizable, and then that unrecognizableness is when she becomes sort of happy with herself and like empowered, because she is like, you can't categorize. Like there's a certain extent to where, it's like, oh, I wish my hips were smaller. I wish my stomach was flatter. But like, you can't categorize like, oh, I have an ear growing out of my, like the top of my head. Like, is that still attractive? You know what I mean? Like it doesn't,
totally different.
It doesn't make sense anymore. It isn't like categorizable. And she just becomes this like powerful monster, and that's like the only time she looks in the mirror and she's like happy with what she sees and like sort of treats herself gently, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna put this, like there's this scene at the end of The Substance where it's gone so far that like, she has an ear kind of like on the top of her head, and she like puts an earring into it, and it's like, and she kind of like shakes her head and is like, oh, that's nice, and it's like, that's the first time it's like, oh, I think I look good.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so I
that
think
is totally different, because the Seconds message, which I think is a very good message all the same, is that ultimately all the alpha male wealth and women and testosterone stuff doesn't mean anything if you don't actually have friends and a happy and fulfilling life and some sort of community around you. And that the attempt to capture recapture that alpha male energy just leads to losing it all over again, and the inability to get it back again. And that also sort of shows the difference between stories about male and female power when we're getting political too.
It's interesting because I had not considered your perspective on that one, Kate. My read of it was more, no, and I like your idea. My read of it was that it was more of sort of I don't know, like a sublimation of the self even, right? Like this sort of delusion that if you change yourself enough, you're worthy of love, right? Or adoration or power. But I read it as almost like this kind of delusional moment, And I mean, not that she was necessarily satisfied with her appearance there, but that she had given herself over so fully to these processes of, material reconfiguration and ultimately extraction, that because she had, sort of given up on the self, she felt this delusional sense of satisfaction about finally being beautiful. That like her self-erasure at that point was so complete, that she was so unrecognizable, that she was able to trick herself into feeling beautiful because she was doing the thing she was supposed to do.
Right.
Well,
I like yours too, though.
I think either reading is either reading is totally valid.
Social beauty standards aside for a moment, beauty is something that can be so individualized and so subjectivized that it means completely different things to different people sometimes.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, not to get too Kantian, a man who I fucking hate. But, sometimes I think that the beauty that, I guess sometimes not all attraction is beauty, right? Like attraction is not necessarily to beauty. Sometimes it's about power. And one example I'm thinking of for this is there's this recent trend of sex workers, of like cam girls, putting on a filter that makes them look like they have Down syndrome.
What?
Yes, this is a real thing. I don't have a link to it handy, but I'm sure you can y'all can Google it real quick. But there is literally a trend among a sect of sex workers who are using Instagram style filters to make it look like they have Down syndrome.
That's a little weird.
Yeah. And I don't think that's about beauty, right?
No.
I mean, they have rockin' bods, but I don't think that's what the point is, right? I think for that, the pull there is for a certain kind of power and control over a female body.
Yeah.
Right. And the assumption there, I think, is the people who are consuming this sort of erotic media, deranged and depraved though it certainly is. I think the appeal there is, what if I had a girlfriend who was too stupid to disagree with me about anything? Right. What if I had a girlfriend who was in some way, and to be clear, I don't mean to imply that Down syndrome or people with Down syndrome are not people or not feeling or not capable of having thoughts and feelings. Of course they do, but
you're perfectly capturing the divide between perception and reality, though. Because a lot of people perceive people with Down syndrome that way.
Right, exactly.
The actual reality of a person with Down syndrome is closer to the angry little slutty girl from Glee, who very much had a mind of her own.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the sort of the fantasy there, right? Is that these men are fantasizing about a woman they can fully control.
I'm having such a hard time with this.
Because I should.
Yeah, no, I mean, I should have a hard time with it, but I'm wondering, is that the fantasy? Is there some sort of other, I don't know. It's it's almost so base that I'm there's got to be something more complicated going on there.
There's one thing that almost certainly ties in, which is that many sex workers will distort their face online advertisements if they are and only actually show their face to paying customers.
Sure, yeah, definitely. But a lot of people, I know people who are my age who are cam girls who just blur their face to be 10 years younger or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not just, I mean, it has two purposes, like you said. One is obviously we're a youth obsessed culture, and then the other is that no one can really recognize you. So if you're a mom or whatever, if you can't be recognizable, you can still do the job.
Well, yeah, or if you have a job where you're worried if someone who employs you, day job where you're worried if someone employs you sees your face, you'll lose it.
Right.
That's
but a Down syndrome is a very specific choice.
It is a very specific choice.
I mean, it is clearly some kind of niche fetish concept.
Yeah.
And, when I see, it's, to me, I draw a parallel to pedophilia, right? Because pedophilia is not about love and respect for children, right? Rape's not about love and respect for the victim. And I'm speculating here. Of course, I am not sexually attracted to cam girls who have, a Down syndrome mask on personally. But that is the market I assume it would be for, right? Is the kind of person who would want somebody with the body of a woman but the mind of a child.
And that makes sense. I'm also, if it's something the sex workers are doing, and if it started among the sex workers themselves as opposed, and this is where I get confused myself, and I'm just sort of speculating, but I mean, it makes me wonder, is there something else going on? Is there not something else going on? And I just don't, I don't know. I don't like to speculate too much. It does seem like there's something, like there is some sort of niche fetish content, but then I also know what the term man's best friend means in an actual sexual context, and it's not the same thing people are mad about the album art about.
Oh, are we going Sabrina Carpenter? Because I'm
only
ready.
because other people only because other people went somewhere that put that image directly in my mind, and because, like I said, I know what man's best friend means. And for those who don't, in a sexual connotation, man's best friend is an anal vibrator that a man can wear at work without anybody knowing.
Based.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. That sounds great.
But
I'm gonna be honest. Sincerely, I have complicated feelings about people doing sex stuff like at work.
Yes.
But I guess if I don't hear about it, if I don't find out about it,
So, but the joke about this is it is a masturbatory thing that is based on stimulating the prostate in a way that a good, 60-70% of men who are inundated in straight male toxic rape culture are going to say, well, that's gay.
I don't know. I think that's I feel like you get a guy alone, and that's not how they actually feel.
Oh, no. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm talking about what people say in public.
Sure.
And I find that imagery juxtaposed with some of the assumptions that people are making, combined with the fact that some of Sabrina's actual fans clearly know and have referenced what man's best friend actually means. There's more going on there than just the obvious on the face of it.
Is there a song? Wait, is there a song that's referencing that I have missed?
I don't know nearly as much about the one thing I know about the discourse is what man's best friend means. So I don't want to come off like an expert.
Okay. I completely missed this part of the discourse of Sabrina. I'm only like
But her fan.
I will say, if that album cover of her like on hands and knees or whatever art that was came paired with a joke about dudes wearing butt plugs, every single person who's complaining about that album cover is just so fundamentally missing the point.
Well, that's what the Sabrina fans who say it's satirical keep referencing, which is I know what man's best friend means.
I have not heard this at all.
You haven't seen that? Really?
No, and I'm a Sabrina fan.
That's funny.
But no, I think that like the thing about the cover is like, it's like art discourse 101, where if you want to talk about like the male gaze, like the male gaze is not just like being out in the world and like guys looking at you. Like it is a art historical or like an art theoretical film theory discourse.
To compare that picture with the famous Madonna picture that other people have put up there in compare, I would actually go a step further and say the Madonna picture centers the men and the Sabrina picture centers Sabrina.
Yeah, well, Sabrina is looking at the camera, so she is not an object.
Yeah.
She's looking at her audience.
She's the subject.
She is
The
the subject.
object is the dude holding her by the hair.
Well, we don't even know it's a dude.
That's true. We only know a few pieces. The assumption that it's a dude is itself heteronormative and misogynistic. That's true.
I think it's Elmer Fudd, personally. But
Elmo.
I like the version where it's Bugs Bunny, and under the, like, or I guess paired with the suit, he is wearing like lipstick and the blonde wig.
Yes, yeah, or it's her.
And the joke about it,
her own hair.
The joke about it being Bugs Bunny is Bugs Bunny has no penis but does have a carrot.
What? I don't know anything about
this. Just in, Bugs Bunny is trans and packing, and it's a carrot.
That's his packer.
I mean, okay, I think if we can say one thing with certainty about Bugs Bunny, it is that Bugs is gender fluid.
Oh,
Bugs is absolutely gender fluid. The cartoons show it.
Bugs loves to be in drag.
And so does Sabrina Carpenter, right?
It's true.
I don't know if other people have said this. I assume they have, because I am not that smart. But I've started thinking of drag as clowning for gender.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It is literally taking gender as a concept and caricaturizing it. And to that extent, absolutely that's what Carpenter is doing.
She's like the hyper femmes, the like or hyper drag. It's like cis like cis women hypering up cis femininity. It's just like
the whole high femme thing that people went gaga over Christian cinema for without ever actually grappling with her politics.
But also, it's a good one to bring in.
I like to pretend that she doesn't exist.
The worst bisexual.
That's good, because I mean, she is the proof that the Greens are a liberal party too, and that Greens can be as much as opportunists as anyone else.
I guess
she's also proof that unfortunately bisexuals can be evil.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important.
Basic human nature is number one, most people are good, but number two, anybody can be evil regardless of their identity.
Sure.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, kind of bringing it back, but also bringing it back on topic. Do you think Elizabeth Sparkle would do the Down syndrome mask?
No.
You think she is
too preoccupied? Like, she's of an older generation, and I think she's like too preoccupied with being beautiful.
She's if we're going to have art imitate life a bit, think about the Stars arc, from being a very young and ingenue figure in Hollywood, to aging in real time to become a MILF figure in Hollywood, and in this process separating from her first wife and temporarily marrying a younger man in what in retrospect kind of looks like a publicity stunt to sell the new MILF image.
Wait, who are you talking about?
Are we talking about Demi Moore in real life?
Yes.
What are we? Okay. Yeah, I was we're talking about Ashton Kutcher right now.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
God, also, what a perfect pull for that casting. Demi Moore nailed it. And but also, I mean, Kate, this is one you'll probably relate to, because I know you and I are of proximate age, right? There is this sort of strange feeling. And, and when I'm, being positive and feminist, I say, my visible signs of aging are a gift that not all of us are able to enjoy, right? But there is also this sort of parallel sense of my power draining. And it's the strangest thing, because beauty, especially very conventional beauty, is sort of this double bind, right? Because it gives you a kind of power in as much as people want you.
Yeah.
But because people want you, it is also a cage.
Yeah, it's like the visibility of being attractive and wanted feels great. and there is this feeling of being a woman who is like, you know, fairly conventionally attractive or desirable, getting older and wondering when that's going to run out.
Right. And I've talked to my mother about this too, and she talks about how nowadays, because, you know, pretty people run in families, who would have guessed? And she talks about how, you know, she used to walk into the room and heads would turn, and now she feels invisible, right?
Yeah. And I talk to, like, there are people, like friends of mine, who are, you know, feeling that, like, already, and they're like, man, it really sucks. And there are definitely points where, like, if I walk into a room and it's a bunch of like 20 somethings, I mean, I think I get, like, to a certain extent, like, kind of fetishized by like younger guys. But definitely, like, younger women probably aren't going to look at me and be like, oh, you know. And then there's that point where, like, well, when does the fetishization run out too? You know?
But to what extent was it always fetishization? Right.
Yeah. But when does, like, I guess the new fetishization where you're
right.
Like,
or when does your appeal become so narrow that it is now a niche fetish?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, you can be milfy for a while, then you can be like a cougar for a while, but then eventually you're just an old woman. And, like, you know, like, those things, yeah, there is still a market for that, but it is pretty small. And like, yeah, if you're used to a certain amount of attention, you know, and I think that's like Elizabeth Sparkle, like, the attention is waning, which is fucking crazy, because Demi Moore, she's
oh my
like
God.
10 years older than Elizabeth Sparkle, like, in real life.
Yes.
She's playing someone who feels like pushed aside by society, but is absolutely gorgeous. And, like, there's part of that, I think, that's important, that, like, you know, this woman who we consider to be, like, iconic is, and, like, plenty of people are still like,
but remember, she's coming off an era when she had sort of pushed herself aside for a little while. So even though she's
but
not,
that's her as a person. I'm talking about, like, in the movie.
No, I know, but I always, maybe it's because I think of the method all the time, but I really think about who actors are as people when they perform roles sometimes, because
think about that scene where she was doing and redoing her makeup all the time.
God, fucking A.
Of all of the things that were in that movie that were disturbing and uncomfortable and upsetting, that was actually the scene that hit me the hardest, because I have fucking been there. I know that feeling.
Yeah, everyone's been there.
Of that moment of, like, I cannot make myself beautiful no matter what I do, but I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep struggling to be pretty. And it's like, it's fucking Demi Moore, my God, one of the most beautiful women in history.
Yeah.
Right? Who has, through whatever combination of, you know, medical technology and lucky genetics, aged incredibly beautifully, right? To the point where she's playing a woman 10 years younger than herself.
Right.
And still
and
being
has, like,
depicted as...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, and just, like, has a like, you know, we with her sort of, like, dissect her entire body, you know? And, like, she's looking at it and she's like, that's disgusting. This is disgusting. And it's like, you're looking at her and you're like, you look great, lady.
And I'm so confident that was an intentional choice.
Oh, absolutely.
It takes us back to this whole subjectivity. And, you know, when you look, you can see it on the internet with this tremendous shallow mindset where men on the internet call these drop dead gorgeous women fat and cows and hideous because of very small flaws, as they see it, that a more sophisticated person would see as an enhancement. And it's very strange sometimes to me.
I actually think that is also about power. Kate, you want to go first?
Well, of course. Misogyny is always about power.
Yeah.
To a lesser and to an even greater extent, you know, Oscar Wilde, of course, said everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power.
Kate, you had a point.
No, I just like, I mean, I guess some of it is my, like, you know, my age, that it's like, this isn't my generation anymore, but like, I'm having a really hard time understanding, I guess, that that's anything more than this incredibly niche, like loud contingency of men online, who like don't exist in the world, you know, like I've never seen them, but then I'm like, they must exist somewhere. And then I know that like one of the like criticisms lobbed at millennial women from Gen Z women and younger is that like we don't understand how radicalized their age group of men have become online, you know, because like I have never really experienced
and not
that.
just online. I want to say not just online.
Okay, but I mean, I'm just I
Because if
guess
you look at the mass shooters, and you look at the stuff the media doesn't really show us enough, but you look at what you can see, it all ends up coming down to right-wing incel ideology. The very thing that seems like it's just online. But, you know, the thing that I always say, and people would get mad at me, but I've always said Twitter is real life, or rather it's a microcosm of real life. Everything online that you are angry about and telling someone to touch grass because of exists somewhere in real life, or it would not be expressed on Twitter in the first place.
It's true, but Twitter is a tiny...
It's a microcosm. It used to be more of a representative microcosm than it is now, pre-Elon. But even post-Elon, a lot of people who left have been coming back because none of the other platforms are really providing the same degree of engagement and interaction, because for all of its flaws, Twitter
it's got the
still
juice.
puts some of your stuff in front of the right people who want to see your stuff in a way that the others don't seem to do.
Yeah.
That's just my experience.
I think oh yeah, you go, Rachel.
By definition, I don't think any social media website meets the statistical criteria for random selection.
Sure.
No.
I would agree with that.
You know, one should not make population inferences based on any social media environment in particular. However, I do think there are truths about types of people based on who is there. You know, and how they express themselves. And, you know, you're talking about like incels and the male loneliness epidemic and the radicalization of Gen Z men. And, you know, I don't know a lot of Gen Z men. I've seen some of it, you know. But ultimately, I think the people who talk the most shit online are often the people who feel the most disempowered in real life.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and so like, you know, and it's cliche to say those dudes are just fucking losers, but I actually think in real life, those dudes are fucking losers.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the reason they're like harassing Sydney Sweeney or whoever is because they see an unattainable object. You know, they see this status that they will never achieve. They will never get a woman like Sydney Sweeney because they're fucking losers. And it's a sour grapes kind of situation, I think.
And it doesn't have to do with their level of attractiveness. Like, there are so many, like, I feel like the whole, like, she let me hit because I'm goofy is, like, a very true thing. You know, like, I just think that, you're a loser. You're not funny. You're not interesting. You're not charming. Like, you don't have to be, like, I've never been attracted to, like, a Superman kind of guy in any scenario or woman in my life. It's like you just don't understand that like people find like strange, interesting things attractive, and like you don't have any of those things either.
Right. There is no point of curiosity about you. There's nothing about you that invites deeper examination.
Exactly.
And one thing I've noticed with the Gen Z I have friends who are Gen Z feminists or even Gen X or even millennial feminists and very outspoken Puritans who Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin deeply speak to because of their personal experiences with the men in their lives.
I mean, this is going to sound really cruel as someone who has had a lot of horrible experiences with men in my life. Also, I think that's kind of like weak. I think it's like super reactionary. I think that like the whole
I agree
point.
so strongly with this.
Yeah.
And I know that in the generational divide that they believe that the opposite behavior is also weak and collaborationist and sets them back. And that's where that whole conflict is coming from in the first place, is both sides see the other as weak in their minds.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's reactionary to just be like, we have to create an Israel for women. Like, that's so fucked up.
Right.
And to their credit, I have to say that the smartest ones understand that. And one of the people who is being most critical of millennial women who acted slutty online came out and did a big post admitting, hey, I'm a certified DILF hunter and post hot pictures of myself. And I just want people to think about the culture where we're making all these decisions.
But I don't think anyone doesn't think. I mean, if there's anything that we're all thinking about, it's the culture
they
that
think,
makes these
but
decisions.
and that's the whole thing. And it's that generational divide again. They're convinced that you're missing something that they know, whereas you've gone through that phase already in most cases.
Yeah, I was actually about to say that. Because, like, when we were still in our ingenue era, we were saying men are trash, right? And I think that there is something developmental here. And I don't mean that, I'm like anti-ageism here. So I want to emphasize, I'm not saying this to like belittle, demean, or dismiss Gen Z's opinions about this, especially not Gen Z women's opinions about this. I think there is a process of acceptance that we go through if we are developing in like healthy, constructive ways, where we as women go through a sort of apostasy, right? Because I know I was raised with like girls can do anything, and then I hit misogyny in the real world like a brick wall, and I was like disbelieving that all of these things I was told growing up about women being equals were actually just hopeful lies. That they were not actually reflecting real power dynamics in the real world. And I was so angry about that for so long. And I suspect that there is a parallel here, that Gen Z women right now are going through a similar apostasy where they are challenging and questioning the ideas they were raised with after those ideas of, equality, egalitarianism, feminism are brutalized repeatedly by the structural misogyny of the system itself. And so to that end, I try to have a lot of patience and compassion for the anger there. But ultimately, the capital T truth of the situation is men are also people.
Yes.
And like you said, Kate, if there's anything we're all thinking about, it's the culture. Although, to an extent, I suspect the majority of people are mostly just thinking about work and Netflix.
Well, yeah.
But to the extent that people think about these things, everyone who is thinking about these things is always thinking about the culture and always thinking about the context.
As a straight white guy who knows other straight white guys, I always end up thinking that people who hate straight white men have a point. Because I talk to straight white men all the time, and I don't like them either.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of it, right? It's like, it is not that straight white men do not routinely have deeply toxic and profoundly destructive attitudes and ideas, because of course they do.
Nor should anyone think that rape culture is not a thing, because rape culture is fundamentally a thing, and that's part of this, where this whole idea of women having an expiration date because of their physical desirability comes from is this dehumanization of women to objectify them for male consumption.
But then it just...
That goes all the way back to paterfamilias, but you go ahead, Kate.
But I think that the sort of when things go too far is like Gen Z women just being like, and it's not just Gen Z women, let's just say like rad femmes, when they're like, you know, it almost turns into like a you deserved what you got if you don't believe in what we believe in. And like,
absolutely,
it circles back around so far that you're like, okay, so actually you have no faith in women. You don't think that women can actually like make decisions.
I've tried to have the conversation with them, but some of the young baby Marxist Leninists really miss the idea that women can do things they don't approve of.
Mm-hmm.
And they really have this idea that, well, all women should sort of stop making choices. And the most radical really do have this idea, all women should stop making choices outside of a set field, because until we actually achieve liberation, anything outside of that field is just counterproductive to liberation.
Well, and I think that is a recurring theme across generations, right?
Yeah.
Like we talk about the impetuousness of youth, and that is the phrase, right? The impetuousness of youth. And I do think that is at play, right? I think if these people are anything like I was in my 20s, and I assume they broadly are, they expect the revolution can happen in the next 10 years, you know, because they just fundamentally do not understand how little energy everybody else has.
I really see this profound sense of optimism that in all of these things that are happening around the world now, people really feel like America is just on the brink of collapse at any moment. And I really want to say to people, it always feels this way. It's felt this way since I was a kid in the 80s.
It definitely feels more this way lately.
True.
But
there's been an intensification of the 80s ever since the 80s, but that's a whole nother show.
Yeah, well, and you know, the thing about a revolution is it is very, very slow right up until it is incredibly fast.
Exactly.
And it's just one of those things. That being said, you know, I understand now how far away we are from any kind of revolution landing in our court and being in our favor, which is its own sort of existential dread.
Well, I mean, Trotsky said back in like 1908, when he was in New York the first time because he was in hiding after the 1905 revolution and he escaped from Siberia. So when he was in New York the first time, he said in 1908, America has revolutionary potential, but no revolutionary movement. And we haven't gotten from that point really since 1908.
That sounds right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And like, even, you know, you were talking about the 80s, but like even in 79 when Alien came out, right? Speaking of movies where women who are amazing and hot forever are also cool. Yeah. You know, Alien came out in 79 and everything it predicted about space capitalism, we're still on track for it, you know? The only difference now we have the world's biggest man-child running, you know, SpaceX about it and trying to colonize Mars. But
I mean, that was also an Alien. Like eventually, it was in the
Yeah. But I mean, I guess my point is that if anything, it just ended up stupider than they predicted. Everything else is the same, just dumber.
1979 is also when Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas took office. And the man that Paul Tsongas replaced was Massachusetts Senator Edward Brooke, who was the first Black Republican senator since Reconstruction and the first ever Black Republican senator in a state that wasn't occupied by the U.S. military. Edward Brooke was the co-sponsor of the Fair Housing Act, wrote the large portions of the Fair Housing Act personally back in the day when Congress people read and wrote bills themselves. Shocking things. He lost because of a scandal during the election. A county DA named John Kerry opened a criminal investigation into Edward Brooke's divorce to help Paul Tsongas win. And this is someone who had been a liberal icon for opposing the Vietnam War, would become a liberal icon because of that anti-war activism, but his fundamental pay his bones to get his political career started was, viciously sabotaging a liberal black man to get a conservative white guy elected. And so, yeah, it started before the 80s. Joe Biden,
yeah, I mean, it started
1972.
Right. Well, and I mean, like, as I said earlier, really, it all started with paterfamilias, right?
Of course.
Right. And this has been my thing for, I don't know, ever since I read a couple of journal articles about, like, that historical and ideological lineage. But
my favorite sort of anthropological joke is that we reached this wonderful socially developed position where we stopped knocking granddad on the head and throwing him out the wagon because we could afford to feed him now. But then we made a mistake and gave him authority.
No, you're not entirely wrong. That's from Bookchin, right? Bookchin's the one who sort of originated the idea that
authority starts with bedtimes. Yeah.
yeah. Basically, yeah. Speaking of which, can we put the grandpas in Congress to bed? Is that allowed?
Yeah,
right.
That would be
right.
Nice.
That would really be nice. But I think that that's like a sort of a good symbol for our modern gerontocracy too, is that we reached the point where we stopped killing old people because we could afford to take advantage of their wisdom, but then we decided that their wisdom and experience meant we should put them in charge.
Right. And I do agree with you. That's a mistake, right? Because fundamentally, we need the combination of both. We need that synthesis. We need the impetuousness of youth to drive change, and we need the wisdom of age to help that change become
mistakes of youth.
Right. To learn from the previous mistakes, to help shape that change to be effective, right? Not even to make it like better, not to improve it by holding it back necessarily, but to help the people who have that energy be effective and not waste their time and their energy, which is a finite and precious resource.
Right.
Well, I mean, so much of what I'm doing is just trying to give voice to people who are less white or less male or less Gen X than me.
For sure. And, I kind of want to bring it back around to The Substance again, because one of the themes I picked up on in The Substance was very powerful messaging about the horror of motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And, in as much as Sue is the child of Elizabeth Sparkle, right? I think that one of the sort of underlying themes throughout it was the way that motherhood ruins your body and takes away your energy and takes away your agency and requires you to subjugate yourself to your child. And, that's a very negative framing of it. Obviously, I am a mother. My kid is amazing. I love the relationship I have with my kid. And also at the same time, it wrecked my body.
So I got a question for you then.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to bring in the sort of male-centered horror of motherhood story, the classic. You get Rosemary's Baby, which is all about the horror of motherhood, but in a way that doesn't really center the woman at all.
I think we could also talk about Eraserhead, which I rewatched on Friday.
The horror of motherhood starring men.
But, I do think that Eraserhead is incredibly useful for understanding the male experience of becoming a father as well,
Mhm.
right? Or becoming a provider, right? Regardless of gender to an extent. If you are providing for a family, there is suddenly this whole new set of pressure on you.
I mean,
Right.
David Lynch versus the people who made Rosemary's Baby. Let's just
Sure. Or like Evil Dead Rise versus
Yeah.
The Substance, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I love Evil Dead. I hate Evil Dead Rise.
I don't
Exactly
think I've
because
ever seen it, honestly.
yeah, so it's like the newest new Evil Dead. They
Oh
did
yeah,
the
then I
like
haven't seen it.
the relaunch. The relaunch was good. The like
Mhm.
Evil Dead remake that came out in like was it 2013 or something was actually genuinely very good and cool. And then after that they did Evil Dead Rise, which was about this woman who recently found out she's pregnant, or something like that. Some situation. I think she was like pregnant and debating having an abortion. And she goes to visit her sister and her niece, and the Deadites show up, and everything goes to hell. And then there's this like dramatic moment towards the end where she like steps up and decides to become a mother, and through deciding to become a mother is able to, save herself and the child after her, sister has already been turned into a Deadite or whatever. And it's just stupid. It's stupid. It's this idea that if you make the decision to give yourself up and become a parent as a woman, you have empowered yourself somehow. And
I'm
it's like, no, materially, no. Becoming a mother is disempowering.
That's got this very trad sort of vibe to it. Give yourself into your biological purpose to become a real woman.
Exactly. And it is such a perfect example of the just fundamental disconnect between the way men perceive motherhood and the way mothers perceive motherhood, right? Like, and that's what I think The Substance got so right, is that it really recognizes and emphasizes the existential horror of it, of giving yourself up to, quote unquote, fulfill your purpose by creating the next generation at the expense of your own value, of your own relevance, of your own utility to the world, right? That suddenly you are no longer a woman, you are a vessel for someone else's potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought of it as like a sort of like a alienation from work thing too. But I think that like when Elizabeth is first sort of like doling out like her weeks versus Sue's weeks, she on the calendar is like sitting and drinking coffee, and she writes down Sue for her weeks, and then she just X's out her own weeks. So it's like she just like doesn't exist.
Yeah, and they talk about that in that scene where she meets the other person in the diner. And he's like talking about, you have to make time for yourself. You have to create a life outside of this other person. And it's true. I'm very lucky. And speaking of like family abolition, right? Like my ex-husband and my kid's dad and I are on incredible terms. We live 5 minutes away from each other, and our custody schedule is set up so that we like basically switch off who has primary custody every 2 weeks. And I think all the time about how much of my own living gets done in the 2 weeks where I'm not custodial, And I also think about like empty nesters, and I think about how so many people, they build their life so fundamentally around parenthood as their identity. And this is on both sides. My ex-husband is to some extent guilty of this himself, right? And his mom extremely is guilty of this, where if you let your children become your identity, it actually creates really unhealthy relationships with your children, because kids do not need, a God figure, although they certainly to an extent perceive their parents as God figures for a time until, the first great apostasy of realizing your parents are actually people. But in reality, what children need is a bevy of fully actualized adults to give them, nurturance and resources and wisdom, and we need that large community of adults to care for children. because otherwise it really does suck the life out of you. And speaking to your point about alienation from work, Kate, I think part of what the substance is touching on, although it's not a core theme in the same way, is that sort of balancing act, right? Of what happens when you do sort of sublimate yourself to this role of creator, and, all you have is your work, whether that is paid work or domestic work, and what that leaves of you, which is nothing. You erase yourself towards supporting someone else. And it is so, so clear that outside of her fans, Elizabeth Sparkle doesn't have anybody.
Oh no,
she has nobody.
She fully disappears. Like, she, gets laid off and she just like goes home. She doesn't have family or like lovers or friends or anything. Like, it is fully the construction of her and not her as a person,
Right. And I expect a lot of that is also about fame. I haven't experienced that one, so I can't like directly relate. But I do think probably there's a meditation on fame in there as well, of sort of
definitely.
what it is to be a figure, or a persona, but not really a person.
Yeah, and, her very name, Elizabeth Sparkle,
right,
and her like tagline and everything. It's like it's all constructed, and it's not about being a person.
Yeah, well, and then at the end of the day, she doesn't have any hobbies. She doesn't have any people. She literally goes missing and nobody even notices.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an extent to which that is also sort of about the existential fear of becoming, a dusty old lady and you disappear, right? I know, like, I went to a restaurant with my kid last night. We were picking up food to go. And I had this really weird moment where a young man, he looked like he was in his like mid to late 20s. He and I made eye contact, and I did that like kind of like, smile because you made eye contact with a stranger thing, and his eyes just glazed over me. And I had this moment where I was like, I know for damn sure 10 years ago he wouldn't have done that. And I had this sort of like this moment where I heard my mom in my own head saying, it's like I'm invisible. And I wonder, to what extent is it worse to be invisible than to be hated, right? Or to be objectified? I don't know. I can't answer that question, really. But
I know that a lot of people online seem to be making as much money off being hated as being loved. So, I mean,
that's true.
Anyway, what else I really liked about the substance?
What?
Everything. But also, I really, really liked at the very, very end of it, she explodes or whatever, Sue explodes, and there's just gore, and then there's just sort of Demi Moore's sloughed off face right on top of the Elizabeth Sparkle star, and they just like sweep it up and throw it away like it was, I don't know, a sandwich somebody had dropped.
Yeah, and she kind of looks like her face is like the yolk of an egg.
Which,
and it like bookends, at the very beginning there's an egg yolk that splits into two. And then she at the end is like an egg yolk, instead of splitting into two, she just sort of disappears.
Yeah. Cell division until you die.
Exactly. Until you're just ground to nothing.
And like holding that again, sort of contra Evil Dead, right? Where there's this idea, like, I don't know, that if you follow this process, you become powerful, and that's just a lie, right? Like, there is no amount of correct action that protects women from misogyny. And that ties back into what we were talking about with like younger rad femmes and, I guess really rad femmes generally, right? That sort of entire process of thought that believes that correct action produces desirable outcomes.
Right. Yeah.
Ironically, the thing that I was watching before starting the show today is an episode of The Blacklist called The Cypress Agency, which is about an adoption agency that literally kidnaps girls from college and puts them in a medically induced coma and uses them to breed children for rich people who want to adopt kids.
Right.
Thankfully, that's not real life, and we don't have any pregnant women in comas that are being forced to carry to term in Georgia.
That's never happened before.
Yeah.
Hey, what was your point? You were making a point.
I don't remember.
Prefiguring this scandal by years and years.
Right.
But
I think it's pretty, it's like it's not even prefiguring. It's like that's always happened.
But the victims in that episode, and it's like, I was actually sort of shocked to see this. The victims in that episode are literally perfect victims in that the bad guy isn't going after women who have somehow broken the final girl rules or anything like that. He's going after college students who match a profile who will give parents the perfect kids they want. Innocent people who have done nothing to deserve what's happening at all, the sort of victims we never see in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're clean.
Yes.
Right? That reminds me of another movie that I fucking love that nobody's ever heard of. It's called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. And it is sort of a mockumentary about slashers. And Leslie Vernon is basically a man who is an aspiring slasher. And this team of documentarians meets up with him because he calls them and says, I'm going to do slasher shit. Do you want to come interview me about my process before I become famous? And throughout, he talks about the sort of nature of the final girl. And it's a really, really fun and interesting deconstruction of the entire genre. Of the sort of role of virginity for the final girl, and how the reason the final girl is always this unsullied virgin archetype is so that she can later empower herself by picking up a long, hard weapon.
Yes, that's right.
And that's if you've ever read big plug for Carol Clover, Women, Men, and Chainsaws, is kind of the book about the final girl, and the fact that she sort of is the penetrator at the end, and and also often is the most sort of often she's kind of I know we don't use this word anymore, but quote unquote tomboy. She's not the most femme.
Right.
She's not the most boyish. She is a figure that both women and young men who are watching a horror movie can project their feelings onto.
Well, it's or totally different. I go so off the wall sometimes. Totally different scenario, but the character of Ducky in Pretty in Pink, or of Mary Stuart Masterson's character in Some Kind of Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're the best friend who you're intended to sympathize with and see as your point of view character because they have a crush on the main character in the story, and the main character in the story is so down on themselves they don't even notice their best friend loves them.
Mm-hmm. Sure, or the manic pixie dream girl archetype too is parallel to that,
which is so Mary Stuart Masterson in Some Kind of Wonderful, by the way.
Yeah.
And there we go. She was just about to say something.
Oh.
Okay. No, that was you, not her. Okay. So here we go.
Sorry about that.
There we go. Okay.
So retracing my steps, we were talking about the final girl. I think also, though, talking about the male gaze, and I regret that Kate walked off at this exact moment because I know Kate knows so much more about this than me. But sort of bringing it back to the male gaze, the final girl is for the male gaze. Like, women can identify with it in this sort of like badass, cool girl sort of way. But ultimately, the male gaze looks at a strong woman and wants a strong woman in the same way that somebody might want like a robust stallion, right? And you don't want that power to exist independently of you. You want that power to exist in subservience to you.
But they want that strong woman to be in a very specific mold. They want that strong woman to be Gina Carano.
Yeah, well, they want a strong woman who will be soft for them.
Yes.
Right? It's the same way that you want to tame a wolf, right? It's not about the power. The power itself is attractive, but the goal is not to honor and uplift that power. It's to tame it, right?
Yes.
It's this idea that the ideal woman is somebody who is very, very powerful right up until she's married.
And if you look at the taming of the shrew or Pygmalion, it's also about taking credit for it, taking credit for that woman.
Right. It's not you have done so well. It's look at my girl. I'm so proud of you.
Yes.
You reflect so well on me.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to an extent that is also present in the substance, right? Because I think when Elizabeth is making these decisions to begin the process of creating her double, she is thinking of this double as herself, right? And the more she is confronted with the reality that Sue is a completely different person from her, the more her horror ratchets up, and through that, all of her sort of base impulses to reclaim her power end up being the source of her own destruction, right? This idea that you can find power by pouring yourself into someone else, which is a lie. You do not become powerful by erasing your own identity in service to aesthetic. You can change yourself as an act of power. And, obviously I am in favor of body modification, full stop. I don't care if it's tattoos. I don't care if it's piercings. I don't care if it's plastic surgery. I don't care if it's HRT. That is your body, and you have a fundamental right to change it however you want to change it. But I do think that there is an important warning in the substance about thinking about why you're changing it, right? Because if you are ultimately changing yourself, pouring yourself into someone else, you are disempowering yourself. And it's so important to know your reasons.
I mean, and I think that the reasons that people do things and people's intent really does matter in some sense, because if people are doing something for selfish reasons, then they not only risk destroying themselves, they also risk doing harm to others along the way. And we see all the opportunistic behavior we see in real life from people who maybe don't have deeper principles and are just sort of trying to get attention.
For sure. And I mean, I think, I said earlier that I thought the earring scene was about sort of a delusion of success. And I think this ties into that as well, right? That earring scene was Sue saying, I am finally my own person, even though Sue was the product of all of these desperate attempts to become somebody for somebody else. And I think to that end, it's a warning, right? It is a warning of like, if you are doing this for someone else, if you are changing yourself for someone else, you will never actually fill that vast emptiness that makes you want to change yourself in the first place.
Mm. Yeah, I still see it as like this embracing of monstrosity, that But that's very me. I always want to see everything as
the emptiness,
the objection.
The emptiness can lead to the embracing of the monstrosity. It reminds me of a movie. I wish I could remember which movie now, because it just all run. It's one of those things that I've seen so many times. It's run together with other things. But the guys say, one of the characters is telling the hero, oh no, it's Tombstone, of course. It's Val Kilmer, Doc Holliday. Says, a guy like Ringo can never steal enough or drink enough or kill enough or whore enough to fill up that emptiness inside him that makes him keep doing all those destructive things to other people. And ultimately it gets Ringo killed by Doc Holliday.
If there is a way to thread this needle so that both of our points are not only true but working together. And I'm going to propose one here.
Okay.
What if, to an extent, and I think this is actually true, and I'll circle back and explain why. What if, to an extent, the delusion is necessary towards actualization?
I'm with you.
What if I'm going to go back to the subjectivization of beauty. What if all beauty is an illusion that certain people agree to see for whatever reason, and the people who are all agreeing to see the same thing say that's beautiful?
I think that is to an extent true. Yeah, I mean, there are certain biological predictors, right? And so the reason I said I was going to circle back is we know from empirical studies that people who are depressed tend to have a more realistic and accurate view of themselves than people who are not. The healthy condition for the human mind is to be a little bit delusional towards liking yourself.
Yeah.
I wonder if, to an extent, these things are both not only true, but necessary to each other.
The late, great Drew Hayes, an indie comic book creator who died far too young, had a line in his book, Poison Elves, where the words appear in a panel by itself on a t-shirt without the character wearing the t-shirt appearing at all. And it just says, happiness is a temporary chemical imbalance of the brain's normal state.
Well, it's kind of parallel to that story about the king who asked for something that would make him smile on his sad days and cry on his happy days. And it was a ring that said, "This too shall pass."
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, maybe there is sort of a synthesis to this in embracing the monster, right? Is when you no longer buy into or subscribe to these sort of collective cultural delusions of beauty, you become actualized, but also become monstrous.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I always tie this back to the abject, that you also realize that the human body is incredibly permeable, that you're not like an individual that is disconnected from other people, and that that is at first extremely terrifying. You look at something scary or gross, like a dead person, and you think, okay, that could be me. But that's the mode that you get into to reach collectivism, to understand that could be you. And that's really scary, but also kind of beautiful.
Well, it's just that it could be you. It's that someday it will be you.
Yeah, it is going to be. There's nothing you can do about that. All the plastic surgery in the world.
Well, one thing I say a lot is, there's no such thing as an able-bodied person. Everybody's either disabled or pre-disabled, and everybody who lives long enough is going to be disabled at some point.
Sure.
And I think a lot of our attitudes about disabled people are sometimes based in our own fear and knowledge that if we live long enough, we're going to become disabled.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a parallel here to be drawn to the way people are reacting to Ozempic, right? And this sort of Calvinist belief that God has favorites, and if you know the secrets, you can tell who they are, right? And so fat people are people that God hates because God made them fat so that you could tell from the outside that they're gluttons.
Fun
right?
fact.
That they're emotionally and spiritually weak. I mean, I'm fat and I'm on Ozempic, right?
Fun fact.
I posted about it a couple weeks back on Twitter, and I just said something to the effect of, it is similar to my experience of starting ADHD medicine. Not because it feels the same way to me, but because I had this moment of, wait, is this how everybody just gets to live all the time?
Right, yeah.
And so many people, so many skinny people were so angry at this idea that fat people might be experiencing something they can't understand, you know? And so many people were like, well, I still get cravings. I still have snacks. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I do too, even on the drug.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so fundamentally different. The nature of it, the intensity of it, the relationship to it becomes so different when you remove that cognitive physiological pressure, right? And I think the core reason people are so mad about Ozempic is not for any of the reasons that they say about it being healthy or unhealthy or vain or whatever. It's because on some level, they feel like it's a lie. They feel like it is a way to help people lie about their character.
Mm.
So I'll be totally honest. The only thing that makes me mad about Ozempic is the fact that it's supposed to be a diabetes medication, and because of controlled shortages to keep prices high, diabetics keep having to wait on their Ozempic so that wealthy people who want to lose weight can get theirs.
That part's real bad. And that part's real bad, especially since they now have shut down the compounding pharmacies that made it much more accessible.
Yes.
And that part, I mean, that's capitalism, right? Capitalism is always bad. Profit motive destroys everything beautiful in the world.
But
I mean, it's the same thing with CGM monitors, that like it's, I have type 1 diabetes. I've had it since I was 12, and I can't afford the CGM monitors, it would be really helpful for me, but like I don't have great insurance and I can't afford them.
My wife is only able to get a glucose monitor for short periods of time when she can get samples and Medicare will pay for it. And then inevitably the same thing happens. Medicare, for some reason, won't pay for it anymore. She can't get any more. And she has to go without a glucose monitor until they can somehow pay for more sensors for her. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're so expensive. It is completely insane. And I mean, I think, as another person who is like disabled, and I like rely on an outside organ, to like kind of keep me alive. So I think that like that's one of the reasons why like abjection and like permeability is super interesting to me, because like I'm living the fucking cyborg life like all the time.
One thing I've noticed a lot, and this is probably why when I'm feeling strident, disability and sex work are the two biggest issues that impact my brain when I'm not thinking about foreign policy and genocide.
I don't mean to laugh at that, but
no, I know, but I mean, it's just everything piling up. There's so much to worry about. How can you worry about it all?
The mostly peaceful bombings.
Yeah, who says shit like that?
A sitting congressman, in fact.
That is a crazy...
Randy Fine, one of the worst. I mean, they're all bad, but he's like trying to be the worst, as if it were a competition.
Yeah.
One day, Mike Johnson will catch up again. Give it time.
So, Kate, I do want to know, do you not think that perhaps you have diabetes because God doesn't like you?
Oh, I've thought about that because I was raised Catholic. So, like, of course.
Oh, gosh, yeah, you got it real close then, I'm sure.
But on the plus side, the Catholics rejected predestination when the Calvinists went too hard on it.
Yeah.
So there is that.
I'm just filled with guilt 24/7.
And then as a fun fact, the Anabaptists basically came about because the aforementioned Melchior Hoffman listened to Martin Luther talk about reforming the Catholic Church and looked right at him and basically said, Marty, what if some things can't be reformed?
You know?
Good question.
It's a very big, important question.
And
I
the
don't
whole
know.
The reason I love Anabaptism is because when you really get down to it in the end, Anabaptism is about abolishing the church. It's about abolishing the church so that Christians can be free.
It's funny though, because I cannot envision a version of the Christian church that does not ultimately lead to issues of power. Because I cannot envision a deontology of subservience to a patriarch that does not ultimately get abused by opportunists to create a cult.
So I'm not saying that that all religions and even all political movements will not display cultish aspects. And you can kind of ask questions. Well, why in the end did they make their top boss a 24-year-old dude who didn't have any real experience and seemed way more interested in making the women feel better than in running the revolution? But at the same time,
who are you talking about? Jesus?
No, the actual final figurehead of the actual final leader after the first two were killed in battle of the Munster Anabaptists was a 24-year-old seminary student who had left the seminary to join the Anabaptists when they took over the city, and who found himself leading the revolution by attrition and not really knowing what to do.
Okay.
And the part of and people and because he was so active in the part about finding people more enjoyable family situations, more tolerable family situations, he was of course accused of taking people's wives away and making them his concubines.
It's interesting because you posed this question of why would somebody put a 24-year-old in charge, but Fred Hampton was 21 when the state.
That's true, and that's fair.
And I think that's important, right?
Were young, and that was an example of everybody being young, and the leaders were going to be young people because everybody was young.
Sure, but I mean, also the Black Panther Party was wildly successful to the point where the state killed them all, right?
Yeah,
I think that that ties back in nicely with my point earlier about the impetuousness of youth being necessary.
And if you want to really get down to it, the worst of the bunch, the guy who sort of betrayed the party's ideology and became a Reagan neoconservative, was older than the other guys too. Eldridge Cleaver was a few years older than everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need impetuousness.
I make a joke out of it a little bit because I'm 48 now, and I look back at myself and think about how stupid I was. But then other days I feel exactly the same as I felt when I was 18 and can't believe I'm 48. And it's like, where'd the time go?
Yeah, I think we need both. I mean, it's such a silly thing to say, but
synthesis.
Yeah, exactly. It's
I have never heard this word.
It always comes back to synthesis. It's like, I was just reading on Twitter this morning about how the youth are not drinking, like they're not really partying anymore, and there's something about, and like this is a funny thing to say as someone who's now like a year sober because I partied too much, but I do think that there's something about like flirting with chaos or like fucking hard with chaos when you're in your 20s that is like kind of important, and like
I mean, failure is the best teacher.
Right, like holding back forever, kind of being like, well, and like I know a lot of this is economics. Like a lot of kids are like, not drinking because it's too
There's
expensive. They don't have any money and they live with their parents longer because they
there's
don't have any money.
there's also a higher degree of COVID consciousness among kids, and by kids I really mean younger adults, than
Hmm.
among a lot of what I would call my fellow Gen Xers, who seem to have this very sour we seem to sometimes have such a sour attitude about our own lives that we don't really care if anybody else dies either.
Well, and I think
And
that's kind of the other side of it, right? That is the part of elders that
Hmm.
needs youth, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Because we do get jaded, we do get tired,
yeah,
we do survive a certain number of situations that we felt like we couldn't, and then sometimes overcorrect to think that, well, nothing matters.
right, exactly.
I can't tell how I can't tell how much it helps me to talk to young folks like you guys.
We're not
Aw.
that, yeah. I wouldn't consider myself
No,
young.
it's not really, it's not really that big of a gap on the one hand. But on the other hand, it's a generational gap. I mean, I'm Gen X and you guys are millennials, and it's like this sort of hidden divide somewhere where some things really are different and some
Well,
things are
yeah.
really just more intensely the same.
I mean, I think Gen X was kind of the last generation to be able to get a firm grip on the ladder. And, obviously that is not to say that everybody in Gen X was wildly successful financially. That, of course, is never true. There's
No.
never been a generation where there were not people in desperate poverty. But I think Gen X was the sort of last generation to get on the ladder before we started having catastrophic economic collapses every 5 to 10 years.
And of course that's appropriate because the person I always think of as sort of the poster child for Gen X in fiction is Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties, who was the yuppie child of liberal
Yeah.
parents and reacting against them. And I think that really covers a lot of Gen X people. I went through my own phase where my parents were liberal Republicans who always voted for Democrats. And so for a little while, I thought I was a conservative Republican until I
Oh
discovered
my God.
anarchism and communism.
That's very funny.
I make this joke a lot, but there is some truth in it. I think radical Republicans are maybe even easier to convert than centrists. Because at least radical Republicans are willing to admit something is fundamentally wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of it is that and when I was a Republican, my view was sort of, well, we have to have more order because people aren't doing a good job as individuals. But then the more I studied it was, well, they don't really want more order. They want more individualism for the people at the top and more obedience from the rest of us. And, that's not good.
Well, I mean, it's the temporarily embarrassed millionaires thing, right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
the question is whether you believe in your bones you can make it. And if you believe in your bones that you can make it, chances are you are going to be less invested in fixing things.
And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that is the biggest reason that I ended up politically going the way I did. I ended up feeling that for whatever reasons, things were stacked against me ever succeeding, and that I had no business putting myself on the same side as people who were succeeding in a system that was never going to benefit me.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me it's like being an artist and just knowing that like the chances of making a living as an artist are kind of nothing, and it's like knowing that from the very beginning.
My paid gig in legacy media, which lasted all of 8 months before my editor got fired because Oscar fucking De La Hoya closed down the Philadelphia offices and decided to make The Ring an online only magazine.
Mhm.
But I mean, my one thing I'm embarrassed to admit that I was willing to let myself be exploited this way now, but I thought that paying work and more money would come of it. I was making $250 a column
Oh, geez.
for writing about for primarily being the major person writing about women's boxing in legacy media at the time. So I was the only person in a published magazine. I was the only person in a published print magazine who was writing specifically about women's boxing and nothing else.
Yeah, but it's about girls, so nobody cares.
It's true.
That's a big part of it. Yes, it was about girls, so nobody cared.
Yeah.
To the point where the new editor of the website told me that he could not edit my work because it was too close to the deadline. And it's like, dude, you don't care enough about this article to edit my work, and you want me to rewrite it for you so it can go on the website after the magazine comes off. I've been working for 8 months with the best editor in the business who tells me what's wrong, extends my deadline, and then rewrites it himself if he's not happy, and then it publishes. Why should I be working with you instead of the guy they fired again?
Well, you see, it doesn't matter how good you are at your job because everything is just politics.
Well, and that's what it came down to. This guy who had done nothing ever but run a website, and I sound like I'm siding with the old codgers again, so forgive me. Guy who had done nothing but run a website ever was given the job of running the major boxing magazine in the United States after the most experienced boxing writer and editor in the world was fired. It's like you're setting
I didn't even know there was a
failure.
boxing magazine.
Well, it stopped being a print magazine for years, and the only reason it's a print magazine again now is like all the other legacy media, it was purchased by the Saudis.
I had no idea that was a thing. Can you tell me more about Saudis purchasing legacy media?
What?
Okay, so around the time just before or just after the 2018 midterm, the Atlantic was purchased. And officially, the Atlantic was purchased by a weird sort of venture philanthropy company adjacent to tech billionaires. It's called the Emerson Collective. And it was founded by Steve Jobs' widow, and her managing partners are Barack Obama's former education secretary, Arnie Duncan, and the former U.S. manager for the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, Michael Klein. And it turned out the money, they bought the Atlantic, using, it turned out, money from Michael Klein's Saudi friends. So while the official running the magazine owners are the Emerson Collective, the people who own the biggest share of stock in the company that owns the Atlantic are the Saudi royal family through their sovereign wealth fund. This matters because because the Atlantic released an insert when everybody was saying good things about MBS before he started doing all the bad things, and the name Prince Bonesaw started making the rounds. The Saudis published an inset the Atlantic published an inset into the Atlantic that was basically a commercial for MBS's new modern liberal Saudi Arabia. They also own the Ring magazine now. They own a piece of Dana White's UFC. The Saudis are into every sort of legacy media and sports outlet they can get their hands on.
I want to say there was a fighting game recently that was released that was also owned by Saudi interests, which is honestly wild, but kind of clever. I respect it, and that's a clever way of doing things, sort of.
I mean, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is like one of the biggest partners in half the billionaire venture capital operations in Wall Street, too. It's like they have money, and they're willing.
I was going to say,
yeah.
I'll tell you this much: people with a lot of money have a lot of resources to make more money.
They like buying shit.
They sure do. Well, that's the best part is if you have enough money, you don't have to make anything or invent anything or do anything. You just buy things that are already successful, strip them for parts, and run them into the ground.
Yeah, well, pretty much.
Riyadh became a huge, I hate to use the word Mecca because we're talking about Saudi Arabia, but Riyadh became sort of a boxing Mecca for all these Russian fighters who couldn't fight in the U.S. because of McCarthyism related to Ukraine and Russia. And Saudis started promoting fights in Riyadh and putting them on pay-per-view for American and British audiences. And that led to the biggest Saudi boxing promoter buying the ring, which is based in Philly, Kate, which used to be based in Philly, Kate's hometown, before Oscar De La Hoya shut it down.
It's my adopted hometown.
Fair enough.
I love it very much.
Well, my editor at the Ring is also an adopted Philadelphian. He is originally from England.
Nice.
You know, Philly's a cool town.
It is a cool town.
It is.
Can't forgive
among
them
a handful of towns.
But no town's perfect.
Yeah,
well, I mean, sure. Yeah, we don't care about that kind of stuff. I care about burlesque dancers dressing up like the Philly fanatic and throwing hot dogs at me.
That's important. That's important.
Yeah. I mean, as a resident and lifelong resident of the Atlanta area, I definitely understand what it's like for the population to be cooler than its politicians, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
I live in Portland. I lived in Appalachia in East Tennessee, and I'm originally from Los Angeles. I know all about the population being cooler than the politicians.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think
perhaps all populations and all politicians. Yeah.
I think that could just be a blanket statement.
Well, I also went to school in Kansas for a little while, and Kansas and its people might actually be more boring than its politicians. But even boring is better than Kansas's politicians. They're all Nazis, so.
Yeah, I'll take a boring person over a Nazi, I suppose.
Unfortunately, you have John Fetterman.
Oh.
He's the worst of both of those.
Yeah,
he's interesting in a bad way and a Nazi.
Yep, he sure is. What an absolute yeah. I mean,
somebody actually posted. Somebody posted his career arc. I don't know if I saw it through Kate's feed or whether I'm just associating because Kate lives in Pennsylvania. But somebody posted his career arc. 2015. I'm the mayor of Braddock and I like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I think I might have retweeted it.
And then 2020. I'm progressive and our small business people need legal weed. Mm-hmm. And 2025. I think we should just kill all them Palestinians.
Yeah, he's a homicidal maniac. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it was the car accident. I don't know if it was the whole switcheroo that
I'll tell you what I think. Because strokes can cause people's personalities to change sometimes, but they can also accentuate what was already there and make it harder for people to hide the things that they always hid from people before. But and I think that John Fetterman doesn't have enough spoons to hide being a complete asshole anymore.
I guess it just seems so bananas to spend that much time faking it. I don't know. I'm just you could have probably run the way you actually were and
if he had ran the way he actually was, they might not have ever run Josh Shapiro against him for governor of Pennsylvania. They would have thought he was fine.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have a Republican.
The whole reason the Democratic Party ran Josh Shapiro is they were scared John Fetterman would be a progressive governor, and then John John Fetterman goes to the Senate and becomes as bad as Josh Shapiro.
No, he's far worse.
That's fair.
John Fetterman is like a bloodthirsty man. Josh Shapiro, he is bloodthirsty.
Well, Josh Shapiro, I mean, there's got to be some bloodthirst in Josh Shapiro for the simple reason that he went to a Jewish school where he was learning Zionist history from teachers who had learned Zionist history from Ben Zion Netanyahu.
Yeah. Yeah, also a Philadelphian. Cool.
Jake Tapper went to that same school as Josh Shapiro, just in case that solves any mysteries about Jake Tapper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I didn't have any. There were no mysteries.
Wait, do you mean to suggest that there's like a ruling class of people who are themselves a social cohort
and
through organic, natural human processes create a tribe among themselves with shared ideals and ideologies, and who ultimately will close their ranks and support each other instead of people in different classes?
Not only that, but if you remember the joke in the original Sabrina, where Humphrey Bogart says, "Don't make it sound so vulgar. This isn't the heir of the hot dog dynasty marrying the daughter of the mustard king." But so since that joke was made in the 1950s, the heirs of Ford and Firestone married each other, and now Ford and Firestone are both run by the Ford Firestone family.
Cool.
You know, I think we've abstracted the sort of concept of a nation state into these giant corporations, but they function the same way.
It's
like the same shit it's always been.
The thing is that after all this, the bourgeois is just a feudal aristocracy without the good manners.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, people really bemoan the lack of good manners, but it's like, it is sort of easier to tell now.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in Connecticut, and like, it's nothing but good manners.
Yeah.
Sort of obscuring like the bloodthirstiness, you know, it's like everyone's very well behaved and quiet about
one of my colleagues, wonderful guy, Jamar. One of my colleagues is a black guy who has the wonderful good fortune to work on the Yale campus in New Haven. Mm-hmm. And I say wonderful good fortune both in the fact that he actually is doing reasonably well, all things considered, but also he's around the worst white people in the country all the time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But
my favorite thing about Yale is still that Yale was founded by a guy who was butthurt because his father wouldn't let him be president of Harvard.
Good stuff.
So you're saying Yale is Harvard's fail son?
Literally. Harvard was founded by Increase Mather, who was Harvard's first president.
Yeah. Would you like to know a fun, strange fact about me, by the way?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I am a legacy at Yale because my Holocausted German Jewish great-grandfather, after being cast out of Germany for being Jewish, came to the United States and started their neuropsychiatry department.
Wow.
One of my
I had always kind of wondered why Yale would just like let a Jew in, because it's not like, you know, in the 30s the United States was not anti-Semitic, and now it's starting to make sense.
You know,
because it was the fail-son one.
You know, there's a Mennonite group in upstate New York because of Hitler.
Did you know that one of the biggest reasons Israel has such a crazy weapons program is because during McCarthyism, a bunch of Jewish physicists were chased out of the country?
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. I guess the point I'm making here is every single time we do this, it has terrible results.
It's true.
Well, Klaus Fuchs, who was a Jewish spy for the USSR who worked in the Manhattan Project, ended up retiring to Israel. You have to wonder what he ended up doing.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because what ended up happening, I was just reading this book called What is Real, and it's about the history of quantum physics. And when I say everything is political, I mean fucking everything is political. The reason it took, give or take, 70 years for quantum physics to go from a niche theory to the sort of broadly understood reality of physics was entirely because there was an old guard of Copenhagen physicists who all worshipped a handful of men who, for frankly petty and rigid reasons, thought quantum physics was either bullshit or irrelevant and useless. And everything else is downstream of that. It's all this sort of political movement where, because the people who were working on it were Jews, because the people who were running it were codgers, we ended up with some of the best physicists in the world turning Israel into a proxy state for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly
yeah,
true.
I mean, think about the ramifications now of people were scientists were getting pretty close to an HIV vaccine cure, and now all of that is going to be over, and someone's going to have to pick up that work again at some point. But the ramifications of that are huge, that politically the people in power decided now that that's not worthy.
And Bob Gallo's dead, so nobody can even take any sort of sad. Nobody can even take any sort of grim joy in the fact that one of the worst and most unprincipled American research scientists lost all his federal money, because he already died a smashing success. For those who don't know, Dr. Robert Gallo was the guy who held up AIDS research for 10 years over a dispute with the French over who should get credit.
Everything is politics, and
Good
all
stuff.
of politics is so stupid.
Yeah, it really is.
It's just petty grievances at scale.
Well, the guy who was responsible for saving lives during the worst part of the AIDS epidemic thought it was more important to get into a bitch fight over credit with Pasteur Labs. Is just so sad. And they spent 10 years fighting that out in court instead of doing the kind of meaningful research they would have done if both Pasteur and Gallo hadn't been spending their money on lawyers instead.
I'm starting to think capitalism might be bad.
Yeah,
capitalism is horrific.
It's almost like oh, what?
And that whole socialism or barbarism thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that how much Cuba has been able to get done.
It's scary when you consider that Cuba is under a blockade.
Yeah.
And yet they provide doctors to the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
And helped Angola fight an invasion by South Africa.
Yep.
Yeah, but mostly peaceful bombings.
Yeah, the mostly peaceful bombing of Angola by South Africa. That's very famous.
What's the not peaceful part? That's what I want to know. What do you distinguish in a mostly peaceful bombing as the not peaceful part?
I think it's about whether the people you're bombing are brown, right?
Okay.
Well,
cool.
So what makes it mostly peaceful instead of completely peaceful is the fact that it was the top floor of a residential building, and because of the way things work, there were kids in residential units below the part of the building that was hit who were killed.
Okay, but why was Israel hiding Hamas in residential buildings with children? Why was Israel hiding Hamas?
Now we're getting into now you also have to understand that by the stupid race science of the 19th century, the people Israel was killing in Iran are white.
I can't
actually considered white at that point.
Well, so and the whole race science is where we get Aryanism, and the word Aryan comes from the Iranian Persian word for nobles.
Interesting. See, because I was just thinking about how, by early race science definitions, Kate is brown.
Oh, as an Irish woman?
Yes, as an Irish.
Well,
I mean, obviously, I'm Jewish, so
Ireland is an important case. Ireland is an important case that I've spoken at length about, because the Irish are white in America, but not white in Ireland, at least during most of the history of America.
I mean, they weren't white in America to start
Well, they became
out.
white
They
in
are
America.
now.
They became white in America because they became cops, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, yeah, because they sold out their potential for collectivity.
And is in a very short amount of time. I mean, it was less than 50 years. In the 1860s, they're breaking IRA prisoners out of prisons in Australia and bringing them to New York and shipping them into Canada so they can go back to Ireland. And then in 1910, they joined the NYPD.
Yeah, well, and it's easy for us to blend in because, I mean, I'm white.
Right. Another movie that I saw recently that did a really good job of capturing this. I was about to say Sinners, man. Yes, Sinners is so perfect as a metaphor for assimilation into whiteness.
I agree.
Right? Because all you have to do is give yourself over to and participate in the violence of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, you get in exchange safety.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and I loved the vampires in Sinner so fucking much. Some of the coolest vampires I've ever seen, exactly because their pitch was so good.
Mm. Oh, yeah. And it's like, we will offer you fellowship. We will offer you the collectivity that you desired, but only as demons. Like, only, not in life, not in the real world.
But then I've been finally watching Preacher for the first time after loving the comic books, and I'm just now in near the end of the third season, so I'm really seeing the vampires as family right now, while at the same time seeing the dark side when it's about it all being a scam.
I mean, I think it's different. Each treatment of vampire is very different, and there are some there are some sort of formations of vampire families that are really interesting, and like anti-work, anti-nuclear family, anti-heterosexuality. But like, I think the vampires and Sinners were a different sort of like
vampires either represent queer identity or bourgeois identity.
Well, yeah. Now the vampires in Preacher in the comic book, even the main vampire in the story, who thought he was cool and who most people reading the story would see as cool, are really sort of these pathetic scavengers of society who don't really have anything to live for anymore except self-destructive behavior that they're now free to enjoy without consequence.
No, I love that Cassidy is a junkie in Preacher. I think that is a really fascinating way of
framing Cassidy. I mean, so if people have read the graphic novel and then watch the show, they will be shocked by how different everything is, but they will recognize Cassidy as being exactly the same in every fundamental way as he was in the graphic novel.
And you think there's maybe something sort of poignant there about what happens when you continue to live under these sort of capitalist, brutal forces, but no longer participate in them the same way.
Cassidy is Garth Ennis's point of view character in the original comic book. He's an Irish nerd who thinks he's cool, like Garth Ennis.
Me.
But no, I was saying when we lost Rachel, Cassidy is Garth Ennis's point of view character in the Preacher comic book. He's the nerd who thinks his shit is cooler than everyone else's, but who's still a nerd. And Cassidy is a loser who's able to personify a winner with charm and experience, kind of like Elon Musk, but he actually literally drinks people's blood. And he's not wealthy; he's poor, because it turns out that when you're living on the dregs of society and don't have proof of your actual age, you can't do anything to actually concentrate wealth anywhere. So he's always living on people's charity and taking advantage of people whose blood he's drinking.
Well, that's an interesting sort of counter to like the vampires in Sinners, right? Yeah. Who are in some ways collectivist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like they have the sort of hive mind thing going on, and you know, the appeal of the vampires and sinners that they're actually offering something desirable, right? And I think that's part of what makes them so interesting, because like when vampires are gay people, right, it's about like the taint and the spread of the taint and the sort of stain of degeneracy on your soul. And when the vampires are the rich, it's about the way they extract, you know, the lifeblood of the people they subjugate. But in this particular instance, the vampires were the people who were trying to figure out how to survive under these fundamentally exploitative and extractive systems.
Yeah. In Preacher, the vampires are basically, they're parasites who were what Marx would call lumpen proletariat in their lives, and who never really were able to find any sort of permanency or deep satisfaction. And then something came along and happened to them, and suddenly they were vampires, and they sort of found escape. And there are only actually 2 vampire characters in the comic book, so this whole extrapolation is from the only 2 examples we see. But they embrace all this self-destructive behavior because it's the only thing that they can really enjoy anymore. And the people around, because they're vampires and they can't die, it's the people around them who bear all the who have to accept all the consequences of their actions, or cut them off despite important relationships with them.
It's kind of an inversion of the Superman thing, right? Like Superman's greatest weakness is also the people he loves, is his capacity to love.
Yes.
Right. And I think, you know, in as much as maybe in Preacher, vampires are sort of parallel to like drug addiction, right?
Yes,
and the consequences of drug addiction and of, you know, out of control youth.
Yes.
Right. It's about their inability to heal.
Yes. And Cassidy's the one character in Preacher who is exactly the guy he is in the comic book. Again, because I think he's Garth Ennis's point of view character. Garth Ennis is also Irish. Garth Ennis is also a big nerd. Garth Ennis is also somebody who has lots of inappropriate thoughts, but thinks of himself as sort of a good left-wing commie. There's all sorts of parallels, which is why Cassidy's the one character who doesn't really change. Tulip changes a lot, but comes out better. The people who do the TV show seem to be much better at writing strong women than Garth Ennis. And frankly, Tulip is more interesting as a biracial black woman than as just another hot blonde chick in a wig with another hot blonde chick with a gun.
Her motivations make so much more sense that way, I think.
She makes yes. Tulip is actually better in the TV show than as just another generic gun chick from comic books that boys read.
Yeah, there's like a perfect inversion of that in like the treatment of Bobby in The Expanse too. Because like in the books, Bobby is absolutely fearless and she will tell anybody to fuck off. And they nerfed her in the show.
Well,
and they made her like gun
in the book too, but her being white and kind of posh is very jarring, and her coming from a working class multiracial background in Texas makes more sense.
It does, because it gives context for the kind of trauma you have to experience to become that person.
But of course, Jesse Custer in the TV show is so tremendously disappointing for so long and doesn't ever really become the Jesse Custer of the graphic novel until like near the end of the 3rd season.
Interesting. So I have not read the comics. How is Jesse different?
So Jesse is the best way to describe Jesse Custer is as an American John Constantine, Whereas John Constantine is a British guy who knows people and has social relationships and is a manipulator and a thinker and someone who focuses on the occult. Jesse Custer is a guy who has a massive occult power, something John Constantine doesn't really have, but who would rather beat the shit out of people. Very American. And at the same time, in a very American sense, he is a good guy in the frontier settler cowboy hero sense of a good guy that at its very best is represented by a comedian like Bill Hicks, and at its very worst is represented by assholes like Ronald Reagan and LBJ. And the most important part is that Jesse Custer believes he is mentally ill and hallucinating John Wayne. This is important because John Constantine, as an early character, was haunted by the ghosts of people whose deaths he was responsible for, whereas Jesse Custer is hallucinating the ghost of John Wayne, who is his big hero as a kid watching movies. Except he's not really hallucinating, and John Wayne is really the aspect of the Genesis entity that takes him over, that was speaking to him long before he ever actually came into physical contact with it and started developing superpowers and having adventures.
Does the comic book also do the weird Hitler arc?
No, the weird Hitler arc is something that was done specifically for the movie.
Huh.
As is the way that Anvil is destroyed. In the comic book, instead of all the sort of trial and errors where Genesis jumps into other people and blows up the preacher with his congregation, in Genesis, in the comic book, Genesis never jumps into anybody but Jesse. It's always been talking to Jesse since he was a kid, and has always known it was going to go to Jesse if it ever got free. That's number one. And number two, Jesse, despite all of his bad qualities, because he really is a Texas cowboy in both good and bad ways, Jesse's defining characteristic is he will do what he thinks is the right thing, no matter what the consequences are to him and his friends. In exactly the opposite of the way Cassidy will do the selfish and wrong and parasitic thing in a way that fucks his friends over.
So he's a zealot, really.
It's not just that he's a zealot, it's that he really believes in all the good things of Christianity while being really burnt out by all the bad things of Christianity. So, you know the line in the first season of the show where he says, we're going to find God, and if he needs help, we're going to help him. And Tulip says to him, well, what if he doesn't need help? And Jesse says, well, then we're going to kick his ass. That's a really Jesse line, because the story finds out with him wanting to find God, to find out why God has let things get so bad. When he realizes God isn't in heaven anymore, his thought is to go get God and get him back in heaven where he belongs. So he does his fucking job. And he comes to the conclusion over the course of the story that God is an asshole, elite, selfish bastard, abusive parent who doesn't want to do his job, who wants to abandon his creation and enjoy his midlife crisis and make people love him whether he deserves to be loved or not. At which point Jesse decides he's going to kick God's ass. But whereas in the comic book, he has, in the TV show, he has an evolution from being this kind of selfish asshole who's sort of reaching out for being a Christian because he needs to believe in something. In the comic book, he has an absolute, insufferable American belief in his own rightness, and he is going to do the right thing as he sees it, no matter what. So instead of struggling with this idea of what this power means, he knows from the beginning he's going to use this power to go get God and drag him back to heaven. Now, what actually ends up happening is completely different because, like I said, he realizes God's an asshole who shouldn't be God. And so, for spoilers for all those who are never going to read the graphic novel, and I'm pretty sure, though I haven't gotten there yet, that the show probably ends in a similar way. He basically ends up doing a big scam in which God goes back to heaven so the Saint of Killers can be waiting for him and blow his brains out.
Based. What if we just killed God?
Not just what if we
Yeah,
just
what would that
killed
be
God,
like?
but what if we just killed God and the person who sat in his throne instead just went to sleep? Because that's what the Saint of Killers does. After he blows God away, he sits down in God's throne, thereby ensuring that no other angel can sit in God's throne and become God. And then he just goes to sleep.
Honestly, probably still better.
Yeah. It's so in my opinion, and there's a long arc to Garth Ennis's career that starts with an arc on Hellblazer doing John Constantine and ends with The Boys, which is what he's doing now. And the really high point is The Preacher. Everything after Preacher is downhill, and he's just retelling jokes he already told in The Preacher and Hellblazer. Preacher is really the story where he said everything important that he had to say, is how I would put it. And everything since then, he's just been making money.
Get that paper, baby.
It is a thing.
He didn't have to completely transform himself into a terrible monster to make money.
And The Boys really has a sort of, it's in The Preacher, but it's not in Preacher to the degree it's in his later work. It's worse in his last Hellblazer arc before Preacher, but because Jesse Custer is so American, it doesn't come off with the same nihilistic sadism that it does in Constantine, with Constantine's British humor and British punk attitude. But then after Jesse Custer, it goes back into nihilistic sadism.
Interesting.
He did a bunch of authority-related Midnighter jokes, in which the central character is not Midnighter, but this obnoxious homophobic comedy relief character who ends up making a bunch of jokes about the Midnighters' orientation but not getting killed, which is just completely unbelievable because if you're essentially Super Batman who doesn't care about killing people, you're going to kill that annoying cop who keeps writing you about being gay. So I've never understood that. Why
if you're already killing people, why not kill the guy that annoys you?
Well, that's right. I mean, he's killing all the bad guys. Why isn't he killing this annoying homophobe who won't stop giving him a hard time?
Gosh. What if we could just kill those people without consequences? What then? What if we could?
Well, that's the thing. He is a member of an anarchist supergroup that calls itself the Authority because they don't recognize any of the governments of the world. He can do whatever he wants.
Can he peacefully bomb his enemies?
They do. They do. One of the storylines in the early Authority is they invade Rwanda to stop the genocide because the U.S. government won't.
That's an interesting power fantasy right there.
But they do the sorts of things that we would fantasize about somebody doing something about if we had power instead of the sort of things ordinary superheroes do.
Okay. What do ordinary superheroes do?
Well, ordinary superheroes fight bad guys.
Okay.
And catch criminals.
Okay.
Whereas the Authority proactively goes into the worst crises in the world and tries to resolve them.
Ah, I see.
And what they do, and they try to do it in a way that doesn't respect the authority of things like the United Nations and NATO and nation states.
Okay.
And
that makes sense. They're frequently culpable.
The bad guys of the Authority are the U.S. government and superheroes who support the U.S. government.
Interesting. So, like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the bad guys.
Well, actually, the way to put it is,
No, not like the characters in Marvel, like the actual Marvel Cinematic Universe in real life.
Very similar.
They're always the bad guys.
You know the fundamental conceit of Winter Soldier, where S.H.I.E.L.D. is secretly run by Hydra?
I just want to say I'm still here, but I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, we're going to have to stop. We're going to have to wrap soon anyway. We're so far off topic. But
I don't know anything about comics.
The fundamental idea of the authority is that the U.S. government is just Hydra and there is no S.H.I.E.L.D.
Well, yeah.
Which is,
true.
Remarkably truthful.
Yeah, and that's truthy.
And it's just it really goes into interesting directions. It ends up being reactionary in the end because the anarchism is the anarchism of a middle-class white British guy who's out of touch with the proletariat and doesn't really like the people whose rights he's advocating for. The guy who created the authority is the same guy who wrote a comic book called Transmetropolitan, which starts out with a story about the massacre of people who are surgically turning themselves into aliens as a statement of bodily autonomy, in which the hero is clearly making fun of both trans people and anti-trans bigots and sort of saying they deserve each other in a not nice way.
I don't like that.
I don't like that either. And but when you have that kind of baggage, your interesting story about anarchist superheroes goes to some fascist places.
I think that is sort of the thing that always allows fascism to fester, though, right? It's not just the will to power, but the fundamental refusal to see the other as equally human.
The need to laugh about somebody even as you defend their rights.
Yeah, well, because you don't see them as people, right?
Because you don't really care about their rights. You're defending their rights as an abstract and just sort of watching when people come in and kill them despite your efforts.
For example, when you get mad at Sabrina Carpenter.
Yeah. Thank you for making me part of the conversation again. I hear Sabrina Carpenter and I'm like, hello.
Right, yeah. And yeah, the thing about media is there's so much of it.
Yeah.
It's true. There's so much. And you can think that you're like in the middle of like the zeitgeist, but there isn't a zeitgeist. There's like 1,000 zeitgeists. So,
right.
You can just be like, oh yeah, I know everything about what's going on. And then hear people talk about comic books for half an hour and be like, I don't know what's going on at all.
What's funny is that became part of the zeitgeist because Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg liked the Preacher comic book enough that they went to both AMC and Garth Ennis and made a TV show happen as their vanity project, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Seth Rogen seems pretty cool.
He does seem cool.
I don't like to put too much faith in celebrities, but as celebrities go, Seth Rogen does seem pretty cool.
I say seem for good reasons, but
yeah, I mean, we don't know any of them, and like they're not, obviously they're not perfect, but like I don't know. I mean, I guess my like criteria for when someone seems like a good person is when they're like willing to learn and be humble in public.
Yeah.
And like he's kind of that. He has been that guy, and like that's cool.
It's also good when and this is nice and simple, biggest Hollywood scandal in history. It's really good when you find a celebrity who not only is not Fatty Arbuckle himself, but also is not friends with Fatty Arbuckle.
I'm gonna need some baby brand new explanations about Fatty Arbuckle, I think.
He was actually there's a if you like really good film history, I think there's a episode about Fatty Arbuckle in You Must Remember This, which is one of my favorite podcasts.
And there's lots of material out there in general, just because that was the first what's the word I'm looking for? That was the first intersection of celebrity culture with the sort of horrific abuse that is supposed to stay behind closed doors among the wealthy, but in this case got out into the public, whether it was true or false. In the end, about the specific incident, the reason people believed the accusation was because of things that had happened at his parties before.
Yeah, well, and also it was part of Hollywood Babylon.
Yeah.
Kenneth Anger's book, which, you know, a lot of it is overblown or completely fictitious, which is an interesting comment on, you know, media.
The interesting part of Hollywood Babylon is actually the effort that the movie studios went to hire private detectives to make sure that nobody ever heard of scandals in public in like 90% of the cases, and not the scandals they actually talk about in Hollywood Babylon.
Yeah. But like there's a camp level of Hollywood Babylon that's really fun and interesting, even if like a lot of it isn't true. But so in that season of You Must Remember This, it is like a examination of the stories of Hollywood Babylon and talking about like whether they are true or not true and how much they're true and how much Hollywood media sort of like mythologizes Hollywood even more.
Have you ever seen, let me see if I can remember the name of the movie. There it is. Have you guys ever seen RKO 281?
No, what's that?
RKO 281 is Lev Schreiber's movie in which he plays Orson Welles making Citizen Kane.
Oh.
And the great Jamie Cromwell plays William Randolph Hearst. There is a scene where Hearst is threatening all the five heads of the five biggest movie studios in the United States to stop Citizen Kane from being made. And Walt Disney doesn't seem to know what Hearst was just saying to him. And Leo B. Mayer looks at Walt Disney and said, he just threatened to tell America that the heads of the five biggest movie studios in Hollywood are 4 Jews and a Nazi.
I assume the Nazi was Disney.
The Nazi was Disney. The other 4 studio heads were Jewish.
Nice.
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 But that's the joke, is Walt Disney doesn't get that they were just threatened, and Louis B. Mayer looks at him and says, no, he's going to say we're Jewish and you're an America firster.
Was Disney actually an America First guy?
Oh, God, yes.
That tracks. I mean, I know Disney was a consummate piece of shit, and that's why Disney continues to be evil.
One of the things that I will always be thankful for my former co-host, my first co-host, despite the way our show ended, and our fight over whether to support Biden or the Green Party in 2020, despite everything. The thing that I will always be glad about is learning that every orange county in the United States has some sort of connection to the Orange Order.
The Orange what now?
The Orange Order.
What is that?
The Orange Order is a Scottish-Irish, pro-Protestant, anti-Catholic, white supremacist organization that supported the Nazis during World War II.
Do you mean to tell me that the Nazis have had political capital in the United States for a long time?
So there is an Orange County in New Jersey.
Yes.
And the founder of the New Jersey State Police was a Nazi supporter who modeled the uniforms on the German colonial police of Namibia. There is an Orange County in California and an Orange County in Florida, and they both have Disney theme parks.
That makes sense. Say something controversial, but as a Jew, I feel entitled. There is exactly one thing you do got to hand to the Nazis.
Whoa.
Hugo Boss. Hugo Boss was fucking great. Those uniforms, tight as fuck.
Well,
there's one other thing. I mean, I hate to say it, especially since I'm not Jewish and actually have German ancestry, though they were Mennonites and left long before the Nazis. The Nazis invented Fanta.
I did know that, but actually, I thought it was that Coca-Cola invented Fanta so that they could keep selling to Nazis.
No.
Other way around, Coca-Cola bought Fanta.
It was a German subsidiary of Coca-Cola. See, in 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and Germany immediately declared war.
Thanks, Rachel.
And because of the war, Coca-Cola Germany could not get syrup to make the traditional Coca-Cola drinks.
Right. And they weren't about to just give that formula out.
They made their own soda pop using carbonated water and apple juice that was the first Fanta.
That's interesting because they do still do a drink in Germany called the Spritz. And it's like Coca-Cola and orange juice.
Mm-hmm. And it comes full circle because there's a joke by Gabriel Iglesias about Mexicans and Indians where he talks about people liking Fanta, and he talks about being heckled by Germans at a show in India. And what do we like? After he makes his joke about Mexican and Indians both liking Fanta. And Gabriel Iglesias is about to say something, and one of the Indians says, they like Fanta too. And Gabriel Iglesias says, no, they don't. And I wanted to yell at the top of my lungs, but of course it wouldn't have done any good because he was on TV. Yes, the Germans like Fanta too. They invented it.
Yeah, that's, I don't know. I love the way, and I say love very loosely, the way people will just memory hole origin stories of anything they like.
Yes.
And like, I get it. Like, I am a queer, gay, married person in the South, and I'd still be eating that Chick-fil-A. The hate chicken, something about the hatred makes it a little more tasty, but I don't deny it, But I feel like for a lot of people, when they have that sort of cognitive dissonance of I like things that are bad, they just decide that things are not bad instead of the much truer, messier reality that bad people can produce good products because products are completely alienated from their creators.
Yep, exactly. And that's the thing about today's art and media is that it is completely, unless the creator has a once in a lifetime deal, it's completely alienated from its creators. And on that note, because I know that I'm taking up everybody's time now, does anybody have any final thoughts?
I don't have a final thought. I have a question. Would you take the substance? Would you do it?
I know too much.
Right. And I guess I should reframe it. If you hadn't seen the movie, would you take it? Would you find it tempting?
I would find it tempting, but I don't think I would take it because I'm very nervous about unintended side effects.
Right. Well, and you have a chronic health condition, so it's something you live with materially.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit worried about things like that. I mean, I have gotten very light, I guess, I don't even know if you can call them plastic surgery, but light fillers.
Right.
And I'm sure we're going to find out something horrible about those at some point, but I already have a lot of plastic in me. We all do.
Yeah, at least one spoon in your brain.
Yeah, so no, I don't think I would take the substance. I think it's a little too tricky. I'm not afraid of needles at all, obviously, but
yeah.
As soon as I opened that shit and I saw the self surgery kind of thing, I would be like, no, I don't need to do this.
I don't think I would do it for like aesthetic reasons, but I think if somebody told me you could be a version of yourself with working collagen, I would at least seriously consider it.
Yeah.
You know, if they were like, you could be a version of yourself that wasn't in constant debilitating pain, I think I would at least consider it.
There
Chris,
was
what about you?
There was a time in my life when I would have totally fallen for the sales pitch that sucked Rock Hudson in seconds. So, I mean, I can't throw stones that far. I've seen the movie, so I wouldn't fall for it now.
Yeah.
Right,
but when I was watching the movie, it was like, oh, fuck, this could happen to me.
Right. It's the same thing inside me that knows that I would at least consider the offer the Cinders Vampires made me.
Oh, sure. That sounds like a great offer, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that I tend to prefer to help other people rather than to try to be in charge of anything myself is I don't always have a healthy relationship with power, and I try to just keep that to the kinks and not let it into things where people might actually get hurt.
You know? Probably the healthiest way to do it, honestly.
That's
Sublimate it into sex.
Yep.
Well, but then you get people telling you that it's all because you were groomed by older women when you were 16 in a way that makes you think, but I was groomed by older women when I was 16 and maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And then it's, oh, but what the fuck? Who cares why? I can't undo whatever happened to me. And
right.
I'd rather enjoy this than not.
Yeah. And you don't need to pathologize sometimes it's true, but you don't need to pathologize every kink.
Well, and like whether it does or does not come from trauma, like you said, it's there. It exists. Mm-hmm. And wherever it came from, it is still part of you. And you can't divorce yourself from your own history or your own trauma or whatever sort of ambient set of influences, taught you to want to fuck weird, like regardless of whether you do or do not have trauma, right? Like at the end of the day, it's who you are now. It has become part of you.
My final thought is at the end of the day, even straight sex is gay because who wants to have sex while you're depressed? Or at very least, who wants sex to be depressing?
Is that like a 1940s joke?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
The era of the gay bachelor and that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
I just have a roommate, I
know what you mean. I just have friends. If something happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Right.
The one and I'm not really hung up on labels. The last time I partied was with a lesbian couple and it was kind of interesting. So hey.
Listen, good times.
Yeah.
I got to get out of here because it is Father's Day.
We got to let everybody go. That was my final thought. So I hope
I have one final thought. Though.
Go for it.
Kink is inherently camp. Thank you.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the best kink is always self-satirical.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of my fantasies end up being making fun of the sort of person I could have been.
Real.
Yeah, that's real.
And probably a lot healthier than turning into an actual reactionary.
Yeah.
It's much more fun to write caricatures of serial killers where the serial killers are essentially just capitalists.
Oh yeah. Well, what is our modern archetype for the psychopath, right?
The CEO.
Who is more psychopathic than a CEO? Yeah.
Yes.
Or of course, now we've got the president of the United States who used to be a CEO, and that's just as bad as it gets.
Counterpoint: the president of the United States is a CEO.
No,
worse. And a psychopath.
Worse. The president of the United States is a divisional manager who answers to the CEOs.
The board. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note,
everybody take care. Until next week, I will tweet at you. Next week, I am very happy Phoenix Calida is coming back.
Woo, Phoenix.
And on that note, everybody have a great week and a rest of the weekend.
Yeah. And if you're a dad, fuck
Happy
you.
Father's
You got
Day.
it so easy. Fuck you. Eraserhead, what the fuck is that? I'm just kidding. I love Eraserhead and dads also.
I'm not a dad, but when I was 19, a lot of older women called me daddy. And on that note, everybody have a great week.
Nicole Kidman, come to me, please.
Taking off headphones.